Thanks for inviting me here. My interaction with the ATA goes back probably 15 or 17 odd years, and I used to do talks out at the University of Western Sydney, and the ATA regularly used to visit my place to look at solar panels and look at batteries, etc., etc. Is there anybody in the room that has been out to my place? There's actually 6 tracking systems up there. That's an early photo, but that's what it looks like now. It's changed quite dramatically. My history. I started in the renewable energy business when I was 16 with my father, and I've worked pretty solidly in it. I sidetracked a small amount of time for a couple of years into aeroplane mechanics, but basically all my life I've done nothing but fiddle and play with solar powers and fiddle and play with the industry. I live off-grid, obviously, and let me tell you, it's been a hard run. It's been a roller coaster ride from the beginning to the end, with both the political and technological changes or technical changes with the equipment from where it was 30 years ago to where it is now. Specifically, the method with which it's been kicked around politically, it's been a very, very hard business to stay in. I've been involved in most aspects of renewables. I'm basically more technically orientated. As you can see, I'm not a terribly good speaker. I do a lot of R&D. I've been involved in the political side of things. I've done solar water pumping and still do solar water pumping. And we're about to be the only company in Australia that will actually be able to test solar panels. In other words, I'm building a solar, what I call a lighthouse. Now, there's reason for that, and the reason is that people go across to China, which is where most of them are made, and most of them have $50 or $100 million in their pockets. They have absolutely no technical idea at all about what they're buying, and they say, I'll have that one because it's red or it's black. So the technical knowledge on the product is really, really slim, and customers are not getting what they're paid for. So pretty soon I'll be actually able to test solar panels. The specifications on solar panels are all rated for 25 degrees C in Europe, and they're running cell temperatures of around about 43 with their specifications. I also have a shop in Dubbo. Now, when you go across the Great Divide, you get cell temperatures, or you get obviously higher ambient temperatures, and we're getting temperatures of 80 and 87 degrees, which, if you're familiar with solar panels, you know there's a thing called a temperature coefficient. So therefore, they're just not getting what they're being promised. And that is from a brand new article. And the temperature coefficient is very, very simple. The logic on solar panels is very, very simple. And look, I am going to generalise a lot during this, during my presentation. Please ask me a more technical, if it's a more technical question later on. The thickness of the wafer is simple. Basically, the thicker the wafer on a solar panel is, the better it copes with temperature. And as I say, I am generalising. So as they're producing more and more, they're cutting them thinner, and they used to cut them with a bandsaw. The little squares in all the BPs and all the early panels, they were actually cut with a diamond-tipped bandsaw. Now, of course, they're all laser cutting, and they're grooving the front of them. So, yeah, there's the need for being able to test and back up the product with some knowledge, and at the moment it's not there. I've been involved in some harebrained schemes, obviously. That is the first ever solar tracker I built. I'm the only one in Australia that builds trackers. We handle trackers all from one little panel all the way up to 10 kilowatts of panel on one tracker, or 60 or 70 panels. That's not our newest model. Now, that's got a bit of a story to it, and that's one day I decided many, many years ago, and the ATA blokes who've been out have probably seen this in operation. I decided that, due to my own knowledge, that it was better to track the sun. So I found some old lumps of steel lying around the place. If I had a blown up picture, you'll see that the top part of that is a windscreen wiper motor off out of a car. The drive mechanism is a chain system off one of my children's push bikes. The most intricate part of the whole thing, that I had a Czechoslovakian build me a light sensitive controller to my specifications. He'd never done it before, but I told him what I wanted to do to balance the light. The most technical part in there was an 80-to-1 Hagel's dynamic gearbox, which reduced the speed of the motor down so that the tracker would go at the right speed. Now that thing went backwards and forwards for 20 years. It was turned into a solar-powered cement mixer. It was also turned into a solar-powered compost mixer. It went round and round and round. Let me ask you the question. What was the component that failed? The Hagel Dynamics gearbox at $270. The windscreen wiper and the push bike chains, they all stayed in place. I've also been involved in solar septics, and probably my most important invention of all time was, and it's still going to this day, and the ATA fellas have seen it, was my solar-powered chook house door opener, light sensitive. Therefore, the sun comes up, it lets the chooks out, etc., etc. Hopefully, I'll be able to assist you understand the next phase of clean and sustainable energy. Hopefully, I can give you some insight into it. Potential of decentralised energy storage systems. Centralised power systems. We need them. What are they? Large power production centres connected by wires and poles. Problems with the grid. Age and efficiency, greenhouse gas production, ageing and need for upgrades. Sorry, that was put in by Stuart. So that was a little bit of a dramatic photo, I would suggest. Line losses. I do, obviously, because I've got a shop out in Dubbo. We do a lot of work in areas besides our off-grid, which is really it's my passion more than anything else. Is off-grid work. We do lots of grid work and lots of pumps and try and work out problems with the grid once you get out the other side of the mountains. Now, if you look at the line losses that occur in the lines getting the power to places like Burke, it's absolutely phenomenal. The amount of electricity that is lost from production to get it out. I think, and if there's if there's anybody who's works for the utilities here, I think they're still on two-phase power all the way to Burke. So problems with the grid. It's fantastic, but geez, I tell you what, it's getting old and there's problems with it. And generally the cost of operation. Renewables have changed the model. Homeowners have put their own small power stations on. In roughly 3 years, that's 2010 to 2013, there are nearly 1 million systems installed. I think the exact amount is about 870,000. And it's over 7% of power. The reason for the uptake, one of the reasons is self-interest, money. A few do it for idealism these days. All of my customers used to be idealistic people. Actually, I met one the other day, which is really strange, an idealistic person who was doing it for the right reason. 20 years ago, everybody was. Now it makes economic sense, but in the future, cost will make it essential. Another reason for the uptake, maybe the 2020 goal, policy implementation, RECs, tariffs, rebates, all of those sort of giveaways, etc., have been a major influence on it. In 2007, solar panels were up to 2007, solar panels were $12 a watt. If you went and bought a BP 80 watt panel or a BP 160, they were $12 a watt. They're now $1 a watt. So basically, in 5 or 6 years, they've gone to 1 or 10% of what they were. Now, this makes you look really bad if you're in the industry, because what you have is you have a whole lot of people from the ATA who follow what you do, and they're idealistic, and they're trying to do the right thing. So what they do is, after a year or two of it coming into being fashionable, they say, put one on my house. So you do a really good job, and you do it for them for nothing, because they're your friends, your aunties, your uncles. But 3 months later, the price halves of the product, so they think you're a mug. So, as I say, it's a hard business to be in. Cost of commercial wind is now around about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. I met a gentleman at the door who was in wind. Am I correct? About 9. Okay. The information that I've got is that we should be getting through around about 5 cents per. That's production, not distributed. Okay, about 9. Yeah. The cost to produce it, that's a PPA as opposed. Anyway, we won't. The cost of a power station is somewhere between 5 and 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And then you've got your distribution on top of that, which is 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So a total of 14 cents per kilowatt hour. But wind power production is very, very close to mains or to grid ordinary power station production. Spikes at peaks can cause the cost to go up. In other words, if you're in a situation, the utilities are in the situation where everybody's got their air conditioners on, there's a huge demand, they pay a huge amount for power. They can pay up to $10 per kilowatt hour. There's a wind farm in South Australia, and I can't remember the name of it, but he's got 48 wind turbines up there, and he's got 1 or 2 on standby. Now, these wind turbines go round and round every day, but when there is a peak demand, he switches his one turbine on for that extra demand. Are you familiar with the name of the place I'm talking about? White Bay, something like that. I can't remember the name. He makes more money out of that one turbine than he does the 48. And that's a fact. They get a peak, he leaves it turned off, it's switched on, it's braked, and the utilities ring him up and say, I want more power. He says it'll cost so much. They say yes, he turns it on and he makes more money out of that one wind turbine. The limitations of renewables to date is no storage. It doesn't help baseline or base load. If you look at solar power production, and we're talking about untracked, what you've got is what's called a bell curve. Okay? Each day. You look at wind power production, and this depends totally on where it is, But again, it can spike. If you site it in the right place, it'll stay there, but over a month period. In other words, it's not sustainable. It's not there all the time. You look at base load, and it's through there. So what you have is you have a situation where you don't need solar power sometimes, and sometimes you do need solar power. It doesn't help baseline power. That is the big problem. Electricity is like water. It flows to its nearest outlet or point of least resistance. If you have a house in a street, and you've got all these houses along here. 1, 2, 3. Now this house has a solar power system on it. The power will flow out of there and go to its nearest point. So therefore, distribution of that electricity is far more simple. In the case of large solar systems out in Mudgee, etc., they will feed the town. They won't leave. What will happen is that, in other words, they won't punch electricity from Mudgee to Bathurst if there's a load in Mudgee. The electricity will go to Mudgee. If there is an excess, it will go along the line until it gets to the next point. Okay, there are 3 types of systems, and this can be either wind or solar. There's your basic grid interactive system. Now, does everybody know how a grid interactive system functions? Is there anybody who doesn't know how a grid interactive system functions? Wipe that off. What you have is solar panels. You have a load, and you have the grid. The solar panels make power. Now, we won't get into gross metering and net metering at this stage. I'm being as basically pretty simple as I can. There's all variations upon a theme. The solar panel makes power. It gets to that point. If this is a 2 kilowatt solar system and the house has a 10 kilowatt load, what will happen is those 2 kilowatts will go into the house. And the house will draw the other 8 kilowatts from the grid. If the house is pulling 1 kilowatt, what will happen is 1 kilowatt will go into the house and the other kilowatt will go back into the grid. Now, if you're talking about a net metering, I won't get into metering, it gets a little bit complicated. That is your basic grid interactive system. It doesn't matter how big or small they are, that's what they do. They go to the nearest load. The electricity, I'm not talking about the dollars or what you're paid here, I'm talking about the flow of electricity. And they're all pretty much the same, whether they be 3-phase, single-phase, multiple installations or single installations. Your next type of installation is your off-grid system. Now these are a little bit more complicated. What you have is solar panels, a regulator, a battery storage system, that's batteries, that's a reg, that's solar panels. You have an inverter, which turns around and takes your DC power to AC off to your load, which is generally a house. Then you normally have a generator and you have a contactor Now that, and you have a battery charger. So, in normal operation, solar power, DC power goes through a regulator, which is like it performs the same function as a petrol handle in a gas station. You put it into your petrol tank, you fill up your car. When it gets full, it clicks off, basically. It fills up your petrol tank or your storage system. When it's too full, that turns it off. So that's all DC power. Excuse me, DC power. That then goes into your inverter, which turns it to AC, which supplies the load. When the sunlight isn't out, you start or auto start your generator, which in turn switches basically a switch, which turns around and stops the inverter pulling power out of the batteries and takes the power from the generator directly through to the load, so the batteries aren't being discharged. At the same time, it starts up a battery charger that in turn charges the batteries. So as you can see, and that's a fairly simple drawing on an off-grid system, but that's how they work. So these are common. Now we move into the new type of system, or the new coming thing, which is hybrid. Now, a hybrid system is basically a small off-grid system. It has very similar componentry, and it can use a generator, or it can be backed up by the grid. And I'll go into the design of them a little bit later, but it's generally accepted as being somewhere in between a grid system and an off-grid system. You have your limitations on what you can put in and what you can pull. But when you exceed your inverter's capabilities, or the system's capabilities to supply power, it load shares with the grid. So therefore, if you're pulling 10 kilowatts in your house, the system will only deliver 6 kilowatts. The grid will be pulled in to supply the other 4 kilowatts, so it's combined power. I'll talk a little bit more at length about them soon, when I'll be asked lots and lots of questions. So storage, the answer. We think of batteries. That's my place too, by the way. That's a picture of my place too. I have pretty close to 180 kilowatts of power at my place. I can power most of the main street, but that's one of the luxuries of being a solar man. There are many other methods of storage. You can get a solar pump, the variable speed drive solar pump that turns around, and a lot of people ask me this question that aren't technically minded. Why don't I use my solar pump, which speeds up from the morning and slows down in the afternoon, pump water up the hill, then put a little micro hydro in it, and let it out at night time, spin the Pelton wheel, the micro hydro, produce power. There's my storage. Well, that does work. It will work. But the problem with that is efficiency. In other words, you are going to burn so much more power getting that water up the hill as losses. Every time you change energy from one form, mechanical to electrical, to mechanical to electrical, you have losses. So the idea is to minimise your losses. Another thing that I'm going to do one day when I retire is I do believe that with today's technology and frictionless bearings and efficiencies of DC motors these days, I do believe that you can make a battery bank out of a concrete block. You can lift it up during the day, during the sun, and let it run down. If you do the maths, it's pretty bizarre, and you look at how far and how much concrete you've got to lift up. But as technology improves, there is absolutely no reason why that can't be done if you can make it efficient. And if you're talking about a tonne of concrete compared to a tonne of batteries, boy oh boy, you can put a lot of weight in there without costing the same amount. So This is potential energy we're talking about. Efficiency at this time with what batteries are or chemical storage is the most effective. But batteries themselves have their disadvantages. I have the utmost respect for the old lead-acid battery. I don't know how many batteries I've installed or been responsible for installing, but it's got to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Now, I can count on one hand the number of faulty batteries I have seen in my time. Human error is human intervention is the thing that destroys batteries. They have to be worked within their design frame, and there's all sorts of things. Depth of discharge, how you charge them and recharge them. The average battery, you're only supposed to put 10% of their 10-hour rate into them to charge them up. In other words, deep cycle batteries or batteries don't charge fast. If you charge them too fast, they get hot. You put your hand on the side of them, they're hot. That heat destroys things. But the old battery is an amazing piece of equipment when you think about it, what it can do. They are heavy. They are dangerous goods. You've got sulfuric acid. Gel batteries, of course, don't have this. They have maintenance. There's corrosion. And they're bloody expensive. Fortunately, there's huge R&D going on at the moment. I mean, lithium-ion batteries, new bromine batteries where there's no electrolyte or sulfuric acid in there. They're using bromine or chlorine water. There's so much being pumped. This is the new race. Do you remember 5-10 years ago we saw the race to produce solar panels? Well, let me tell you, the race for storage is on now, and it's going really, really fast. It takes 3 to 5 years for any of these developments to hit production and get out there. But if you knew the developments that were going on, you'd be stunned. There was one of the fellows that I was talking to, one of the companies, they're working on a new electrolyte. And the thing that stops batteries being able to be charged for automotive reasons is the time that it takes to charge that battery. In other words, you can't just belt the power into it. You use it over a period of 3 or 4 hours, but you can't fill it up in 3 or 4 hours. There's a new electrolyte, nanotechnology, can't tell you too much about it, but allows you to charge, it will, or supposedly will allow you to charge a battery bank in the same time it takes you to fill your petrol tank of your car. And that is a battery bank to run a car. So there are so many developments going on out there in storage that they will all start to come through now. We are currently working with a company called Ucult, which is a spin-off, or it was a battery that was developed by the CSIRO, a very intelligent man in the CSIRO. I'll push the button and give them a bit of a plug. They're really into large systems, and a normal everyday lead-acid gel battery can be charged and discharged 1,853 times. Okay? In other words, you can charge it. There are obviously parameters to make those figures work. In other words, if you have an off-grid house and you're going to flatten that battery 365 days of the year, etc., 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 you can run the numbers. Ucult, an American company which bought the design from the CSIRO, have brought out a new battery, and that new battery, this is real, this is in existence, it's out there in trial. It's taken 1,800 cycles to 18,000 cycles. So what that means is you can buy a set of batteries that will last you for the rest of your life, or you can flog the hell out of them a lot harder and still get the same. And they're still lead acid. There's no major change. There's some small intricacies inside the battery. They won't be terribly expensive. In other words, it's revolutionary. Revolutionary. It's amazing stuff. And of course, in storage, we all know about CSP. And we've seen the programs about salt, hot rocks, etc., etc. This is a new thing, but that's, of course, this is thermal technology, not photovoltaics. So storage is a bank for short-term loans for power. In other words, what you look at a battery bank as is as a bank, and it gives you a short-term loan of power and then you pay it back, but you pay the price. And the price is you take 10 out, you've got to put 12 back in. They are also load levelers, and they're also cleaners, electricity cleaners. You'll find we've done quite a lot of work. Most of the large mainframes, computers that are working in any large company, finance company, bank, they all run through this style of system, or a UPS system, which is no different to an off-grid system or even a hybrid system. And they do that because the power that comes out of the equipment is beautiful, it's sweet. In other words, they can control the voltage output, the frequency. The mains is absolutely shocking. The voltage on a normal household, they can run from 300, 320 volts down to 150 volts. And the frequencies bounce all over the place. And what this does, if you take this computer here, right, you'll find inside there's all sorts of componentry. They're all designed to run at 240, 230 volts. You take them out of their specification and one of them runs hot. It gets hot. It's meant to run at a certain, and it goes pink, and then you throw your TV away. These systems supply beautiful, clean power. So that's very, very important. Inherent problems of storage, besides the physical aspect, has been cost, and currently it's running at about, at a retail level, about $500 per kilowatt hour, and the lifespan of 1,850 cycles. But that will all change. This will change rapidly as, hang on, I'll just, where am I going? This will change rapidly and is changing rapidly as price trends are indicating downward now. Okay, so in the next 2 or 3 years you're going to see some major movement. So the wash up is, this is the next big change. And it's coming soon. It will be raped and commoditised by marketing companies, without a doubt. New technology tested on consumers. Already know that's happening, like the panels. For example, and there was a chap from the ATA who always used to ask me, older chap, and I'm Brian, about lithium ion. When's lithium ion going to come online? This was 17, 20 years ago when he was out there. Lovely old fella. Lithium ion for off-grids sound good, don't they? But if you look at a lithium ion battery, and if any of you know how they work, they've all got lots of little cells, 2-volt cells, etc. But the balance of each cell is absolutely critical. So they've all got fine wires, tiny little hair wires going back to a controller, and that controller balances the charge for each cell. This is not necessary in a lead-acid battery. If you've ever been to an off-grid situation after a year that you've installed it and you lift up the battery box, you'll find it's full of crap, right? Mice crap, spiders, everything like, you can't help it. If you were a mouse or a rat and you had a lovely dry spot, okay, possums, all sorts of things, all you need is one of those little wires to be chewed, and you get a cell that runs at the wrong voltage, the whole bank blows up. So the practicality of this new technology, which is being designed on a weight basis for automobiles, which is a different section, is not applicable to off-grid. Yet There are people on the internet selling this stuff to off-grid people. A classic example of this was the Dreamliner grounding the other day. The problem was lithium-ion batteries got too hot, grounded all the aeroplanes. So the technology is being tested, and unfortunately it's being tested on consumers. An example of a rudimentary system of the future is Bega. I'd like to thank Essential Energy for the opportunity to do the job. It was challenging, but it was exciting. The end result was pretty good. It was a whole lot of fun. So I'll explain those pictures. Up there, we said a regulator. These are what they call maximum power point trackers, all computerised. And what they do is their function is to maximise the output of a solar panel. This is all in a container. Make it run with at its most efficient point with least inefficiencies. Turn the voltage from higher voltage DC into low voltage battery DC. They have alarms and warnings. In other words, they are a controller. It's a 20 kilowatt system. Bega is a 20 kilowatt system. Here we go. Bega is a 20 kilowatt flat on roof system. It is not tracked. The whole installation besides the panel is in a container, a big 20-foot container. It is air conditioned and it holds 216 kilowatts of battery. Oops, I'll go to the next one. Sorry. They are gel batteries. Yep. 216 kilowatts. There's 72 1500 amp hour LJW gel batteries. It's 1500 amps at the C10 rating. So if you look at the duration of the power delivery, it's actually larger than that, because if you take it to the C100 rating, you can add 20% to the output of it. So Bega is a 20 kilowatt, 216 kilowatt hour battery bank. It's fully sustainable. It is grid backed up, and it is also a controllable grid feed, controllable grid feed power supply. I'll take questions on it. You'll probably ask me a few questions in question time. So it's a real breaker. Okay, really to close from here, politics doesn't matter anymore, which is absolutely wonderful. It makes sense to own a solar system or a wind system. It is now mainstream technology. So I ask the question, which has already been asked, why after all these years are you still the Alternative Technology Association?
Hence my comment.
Yes. Okay, basically that's all I got for you folks, I think. Back up there. Do you have questions?